Friday evening to be with us. Um, Let me start by saying what the Society for the Study of the Past is. That might be familiar to some of you, it might not be familiar to others. The Society for the Study of the Past is a new subject organization for those who are interested in the past, whether it be ancient, medieval, modern, or any kind of past that perhaps doesn't fit into those periodizations. And the idea of the society was that this would be a society about studying the past in solidarity with the occupied and with the oppressed explicitly. So it would be about rejecting the idea that history can or should be apolitical. And it would also be about doing better than other subject organizations have managed to do at standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We launched the society this year very much because we were extremely disappointed at the way that other subject organizations had been unable to condemn the genocide of the Palestinians. That was really the impetus for the founding of the society. I'll say a bit more perhaps at the end of today's discussion about how you can get to know more about the society and take part in further events if you'd like to. But what I'd like to do very quickly before I pass on to our speakers is say a little bit about what this meeting is. We call this meeting an urgent meeting, an emergency meeting, depending on which of the emails that you saw. The reason we called it an emergency meeting or an urgent meeting or a special meeting is because we understood it to be necessary this week to have an urgent conversation about the role that the weaponizing of archaeology in particular, but the ancient past more generally, plays in the occupation and more recently the genocide of the Palestinians. And the kind of motivating factor for having that meeting this week was a report published by the UN Special Rapporteur on Occupied Palestine, Francesca Albanese, who published just this week a report where she makes a number of investigations into economic entanglements with genocide and occupation. But she also says something really very interesting about archaeology. She says that archaeology contributes to the ideological scaffolding of apartheid. In fact, what I'd like to do is just read to you section 82, which is the section in which she makes this pronouncement about archaeology. It's under the heading Knowledge Production and Violence Legitimation. She says, in Israel, universities, particularly law schools, archaeology, and Middle Eastern studies departments, contribute to the ideological scaffolding of apartheid, cultivating state-aligned narratives, erasing Palestinian history, and justifying occupation practices. Meanwhile, science and technology departments serve as research and development hubs for collaborations between the Israeli military and arms contractors, including Elbit Systems, IAI, IBM, and Lockheed Martin, and so contribute to producing the tools for surveillance, crowd control, urban warfare, facial recognition, and targeted killing tools that are effectively tested on Palestinians. So there are lots of interesting things about this short passage. I won't dive too deeply into it right now, but what's happening here is the UN Special Rapporteur on Occupied Palestine is putting archaeology on the same footing as those departments that are working directly with what are sometimes called defense contractors or weapons manufacturers like Elbit Systems, for example. And I think this is a moment of urgency for us as people who are interested in the study of the ancient past. It's also, I have to say, for those of us involved in the Society for the Study of the Past and in projects like Critical Ancient World Studies and Everyday Orientalism, it's also something of a interesting moment because we have been for the last 2 years making precisely this case that archaeology and narratives of the ancient past are involved in the occupation of the Palestinians and are also complicit in their genocide. So this was an interesting moment for us who were involved in the organizing of this society because it was a moment where we saw that Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, had recognized something that we had for a much longer period of time been advocating was the case. And some of the speakers that you are going to hear from this evening had been making this case much, much longer, in fact, than we had. So I think this is an interesting moment. It's also, I hope, inshallah, the moment when we might be kicked out of the this kind of disciplinary refusal to do anything about this kind of stasis or kind of constant repeating of this idea that history is apolitical, which has marked our disciplines over the last 2 years, and which has meant, I think, that the disciplines have refused to meaningfully be engaged with the struggle for Palestinian liberation. So I hope that we might be able to use this report as a way of beginning a movement, extending a movement, growing a movement within those who are interested in the past, and specifically the ancient past too. So this meeting will be in 2 halves. We'll hear some short speeches. We have got 3 speakers this evening. You're going to hear in turn from Rafi Greenberg, from Fadel Al-Utol, and from Jen Baird. We're hugely, hugely grateful to them for joining us this evening, and joining us, I have to say, at very short notice too. So thank you very, very much. We're really very grateful. You'll hear first those 3 short presentations. They will be short because I want us to keep some time for discussion, but they will try to contextualize this report and contextualize this problem of the weaponizing of archaeology in favor of occupation and genocide. And then after that, you'll have a chance to ask them questions. And then we will try to move towards a broader discussion where we'll be discussing the question, what can we do now in the immediate and medium-term future to stand against this kind of weaponizing of archaeology and narratives about the ancient past for the purposes of occupation and genocide. So we're hoping this will be, on the one hand, a meeting where we might learn something, but also a meeting where we might go out and do something in the world too. Let me say a few things about procedure before we go on. This meeting will last no longer than an hour. So the idea is that at 8 o'clock UK time, we bring this to a close. I know that people have places to be, so hopefully that won't be too much of an issue. Let me just briefly say something about expectations around behavior. You will know, if you have managed to find the link to this meeting, that the fact of holding this meeting was not without opposition. It was not without strongly voiced opposition, including on the Liverpool classicist list and in other places where we advertised it. That's not uncommon for us. It's relatively usual for our meetings to meet with resistance. But I want to state very clearly that academic freedom is extremely important. That doesn't mean that every meeting can discuss every possible thing. We're not here in this meeting to quibble with UN definitions about things like illegal occupation or genocide. So if you're sitting here thinking, I want to tell everyone at this meeting that Francesca Albanese is wrong to call this an occupation of occupied Palestine, this is unlikely to be the right meeting for you to do that. There no doubt will be other meetings where you can express your lawful opinions. This meeting is unlikely to be that one, because this is a very focused meeting about what we can do as archaeologists, as people interested in the ancient past, as people interested in history more generally, to stand against this kind of weaponizing of archaeology. So I'm just saying that to manage your expectations about what sorts of conversation we're likely to have here. I also want to say that we will, of course, not tolerate any kind of abusive language at this meeting, be it anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or hateful in any other kind of way. Anybody who engages in that will be removed from the meeting immediately without warning, as will anybody who disrupts this meeting in any way, because I think it's very important that we allow this important discussion to take place. So with all of that said, I'll repeat my thanks to everyone for coming, and particularly to our speakers. And I will pass to you, Rafi, to make a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chella. Thanks, everyone who has joined us. And I would like to stress that these meetings are super important for those of us in Israel-Palestine who are engaged in any kind of resistance to the dominant and violent forces that are controlling the narrative. I would like to begin by saying that this is truly a time of emergency. So even if a ceasefire is forthcoming, this will just be a change in what is a long-term devastation, a long-term ethnic cleansing, which is ongoing and which has increased, and which is the stated aim of many of Israel's leaders, and unfortunately of a large part of the Israeli public, of the Jewish Israeli public. in terms of looking at the past, I would call it a de-Palestinification, if that's a word. That is just trying in many different ways to erase the existence of um, the Palestinian people, whether as a national group or as historic communities in Palestine. So what can a subject organization or a professional organization, what should they be doing? Or what could I hope to hear from such organizations? I want to be clear that there are certain things that I cannot say legally. So you might have to infer certain things that I will not say in so many words. But I do think that at a deep level, that is not at the level of everyday action, but at a fundamental and radical level, we really, or archaeological organizations, archaeologists abroad, especially in Western countries or in the global North, have to think what is decolonial change in archaeological practice. And I'm not just talking about the texts that we read or the way that the departments are composed or, who gets promoted and that kind of thing. But I'm actually talking about archaeological practice. That is, can we reach a, a condition in which it would be no more acceptable to have, let's say, an American college owning a concession for an excavation in a Middle Eastern country, Palestine or otherwise, uh, and it would be as unacceptable as I think by now perhaps United Fruit, the corporation is no longer excavating in Central America. I think that maybe I'm wrong about that, but I would like to think so. So I think it's unacceptable now for a multinational corporation to run an excavation in Honduras or Guatemala. And I think it should be unacceptable for an evangelical school or a school that has um, just biblical archaeology in mind, for example, to have a concession that is to have basically temporary ownership of a site in the Middle East. And that is a radical difference. That means that the things that you bring up your students to do will have to be somehow different from the traditions of University of Chicago and Kotzen Institute and University College in London and so on. Now I know things are changing, but I don't think they have changed much in this part of the world. So I would like, even as we deal with the emergency, to think about what radical decolonial change in archaeological practice looks like. And it's something I've wrestled with on my own, and I would like to ask others to join me in thinking about this. Of course, it's difficult for those of us who have been brought up in a certain tradition to think outside of that tradition. As for the immediate response, and there are other parts of Albanese's document and of other recent UN documents or documents that are in preparation that actually specifically call out archaeology, which hasn't been done in the past. So archaeology is now recognized as an important cultural and human rights sort of resource that is being taken away from Palestinians by the occupation. And what is needed is that and of course, this is in contravention to well-known international conventions and charters and international law. Now, we know international law is in crisis, and the Americans and Trump, et cetera, tend to ignore international law. And yet, uh, I don't think it's so easy for universities, academic institutions, and groups and archaeological organizations to write off international law and international conventions and international charters. So what we need is to call out every single case in which a presentation or a publication is made in which a participant is either an illegal settler, that is the way it's been defined by the UN, that is across the green line, or is carrying out what is in contravention to international conventions and charters, that is illegal excavations. And those have to be called out at conferences and in publications. And we should not participate in conferences in which those presentations have been accepted. Now, you can easily think of the large organizations that are still accepting that kind of work, especially the American Schools of Oriental Research, which is really a tall task. It's a difficult hurdle because Israelis comprise, I don't know, a large percentage. I don't know if it's 30%, but a very large percentage of participants there. And American Zionist supporters are also quite significant at ASOR. So if this is not doable, that is, if we can't swing the large Levantine-oriented conferences away from accepting papers on East Jerusalem, accepting papers on the West Bank, and or accepting papers from people who live in settlements or who are active in such excavations, then I would like to consider setting up an alternate kind of conference, a sort of WAC for the Middle East. That is a conference that will invite people who expressly opt out of what I've been taught. I don't want to repeat myself, of everything I described above. So, in that kind of conference, we can hear more about projects of resistance to colonialism, to colonization, and to ethnic purification. They can be featured in such a conference. So I'm just throwing that out there as something, and I would try to set that up inside my own country as well. But of course, that would be quite limited in scope. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rafi. And on that question of conferences, I'll say a bit more about this at the end of the meeting, but let me just remind everyone that the Society for the Study of the Past will be having their first annual meeting in the UK on the 6th of October, 2025. And that's a conference called Beyond Methodological Nationalism. The idea is explicitly to engage with projects of resistance. So we'll put the information on that into the chat as one way of perhaps picking up on these ideas, but we'll come back in discussion to some of the things that Rafi mentioned there. Thank you ever so much. Let's pass now to Fadel. Fadel is going to speak to us in Arabic. He's going to be translated by Elias Khalil. Thank you so much, Elias, also for joining us. Donc, Fadel, c'est à toi. Merci.
Merci. مساء الخير، شكرا على الاستضافة والتضامن. أنا سعيد جدا اليوم باللقاء معكم، وأنا باللقاء التضامن مع الآثار، وأنا اليوم هتكلم معكم اليوم بالاجتماع، هنتهزوا فرصة وأتحدث أكثر عن اللي هو التاريخ وآثار غزة يعني.
Okay, Fadel says good evening to you all. Thank you for having me and for your solidarity. He's very happy to be here today, and he'll use this opportunity to talk more about the history of Gaza and archaeology in Gaza.
لما نحكي عن غزة يعني غزة اللي هي غزة التاريخ، غزة الآثار.
When we speak of Gaza, immediately we speak of a ton of archaeology and a lot of history.
اليوم احنا بدي انتهزها فرصة، حبدأ أول إشي بالحصار على غزة، بعدين ححكي عن آثار غزة.
Okay, so I will start with talking about the effect of kind of the blockade on Gaza, and then about the archaeology.
يعني احنا بنعرف انه غزة مدينة قديمة، غزة مدينة أثرية، يعني وين ما بنشتغل بغزة بنلاقي آثار ومواقع أثرية وقطع أثرية.
Gaza is a very old city, as you know, which means that anywhere you try to do archaeological work in Gaza, you stumble upon ancient artifacts.
حتى لو سبحنا في البحر بنلاقي آثار.
even if you were to swim in the sea, you'll also find stuff there.
بنحكي عن غزة بتتحارب بالحصار بالآثار من عشرات السنين تتحارب بحصارها للآثار.
Gaza is also being fought with archaeology, or has been fought with archaeology for decades now.
يعني أنا بشتغل في غزة من سنة 1995 في مجال الآثار بعد الانسحاب بالجيش الإسرائيلي وقدوم السلطة الوطنية الفلسطينية في غزة.
I have worked in archaeology in Gaza since 1995, after the establishment of the authority there.
ما كانوا يسمحوا لنا بفترة ال30 سنة هاي إنه نستمر في مجال العمل والتنقيب والحماية الآثار.
In these 30 years, they have not been allowed to actually pursue any kind of serious excavations or archaeological works.
غزة مدينة مغلقة، يعني بيقدروا يتحكموا فينا كيف بدهم زي ما بدهم، المعابر كلها والحدود كلها هي مع الجانب الإسرائيلي، فهذا السبب اللي بيقاومهم اللي أقوياء فيه علينا بحصار اللي هو علينا بغزة.
Gaza's borders, as you know, are fully controlled by the Israeli army, which makes this kind of pressure and blockade on any kind of archaeology very easy.
حتى لما كنا بدنا نعمل عمليات الترميم والحماية كانوا يرسلوا بعض الأشياء ويسكروا علينا بعض الأشياء.
Even when they wanted to engage in certain archaeological rehabilitation of sites and so on, they were being kind of selectively disallowed from doing some of them.
صرنا احنا نتحدى الاشياء عملنا فريق، كونا فريق من الاثار مختصين من الاثار اللي هم خريجين الجامعه الاسلاميه وجامعه فلسطين، طلبه من التاريخ والاثار والهندسه المعماريه.
So we fought against this by forming a team of archaeology graduates, history graduates from Islamic University of Gaza and other universities in order to carry out the work.
كونه الحصار مستمر علينا صرنا نعمل الاشياء البديله في غزه.
Since this kind of blockade by the Israeli army has been going on for a long time, we looked for ways of doing whatever is within our means.
بعدين استمر الحصار، بعدين صار الخراب. بعد استمرار الحصار صار الخراب في غزة.
So after these decades of control and blockade on archaeology in Gaza came the devastation and the destruction.
يعني احنا اليوم عندنا بغزة بنحكي عن 321 موقع أثري في غزة وتراث.
So in terms of sites, we count 321 archaeological sites in Gaza.
وغزة المدينة القديمة كمان موجودة.
Including the Gaza's old city.
من يوم الحرب، من بداية الحرب إلى اليوم تم تدمير بعض المواقع الأثرية بشكل مباشر.
Since this last war started, some of these sites have been targeted and destroyed directly.
في بعض المواقع الأثرية لا يوجد أي أخبار منها بسبب وجود الجيش الإسرائيلي ما زال موجود فيها.
Some of these sites we have no news about because they are actively occupied by the Israeli army. So there is no way to know the status of those sites.
أما المواقع الأثرية اللي انسحب منها الجيش تم توثيقها وتم التعريف عليها وتم دراسة كيف الاعتداء على هذه المواقع الأثرية.
As for sites that are not actively occupied at the moment, some of the members of the team have attempted to go and check on whatever's left there and document the extent of the damage and aggression.
أنا ذهبت على جميع المواقع الأثرية اللي تم تدميرها وتم توثيقها بالتصوير.
Fadel has personally gone to some of these sites and documented with photos and videos their current state.
يعني إحنا لما بنحكي عن التدمير الحصار والتدمير الممنهج يعني شيء مقصود لمسح تاريخ غزة.
This combination of the blockade and the deliberate targeting of sites is a direct attempt at erasing the history of Gaza.
وأنا ما بدي أطيل عليكم كتير لأنه الحديث كبير والألم كبير، الأضرار والألم كبير كتير. ما بدي أطيل عليكم، كل إشي رسالتي اللي أنا بوصلها إنه مزيدا من التضامن، مزيدا من الحفاظ، مزيدا من الإدانات اللي هو الاعتداء على المواقع الثقافية الأثرية.
I don't want to speak much longer. There is much pain and much damage, and my message to you all is to continue with the solidarity work and specifically the condemnation of the targeting of archaeological sites in Gaza.
شكرا لكم كتير.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, shukran jazilan, jazakallah khair, Fadel, and thank you, Elias, too, for your translation. People who've been to our meetings before, including critical ancient world studies meetings and everyday Orientalism meetings, will by now be very familiar with Fadel. You'll remember that Fadel, while he was still in Gaza, was a huge part of the work that we were able to do to hear about the destruction that was going on, because it was Fadel who was going to the sites and taking note of the destruction that was happening there. So that was a large part of how we knew anything at all about this incredible destruction of Palestinian history and heritage. So thank you ever so much. We're grateful to you for joining us. I'm going to pass now to Jen Baird for a slightly broader view on the weaponizing of archaeology. Thank you so much, Jen, for being here.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully that's going to work. Chella, can you tell me if it's okay?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, we can see that. Perfect.
Perfect. Sorry, you can tell I'm a trained classical archaeologist because I can't speak without some slides, even at short notice. It's a bit odd, isn't it, in 2025 to have to say again that archaeology is political. It's even odder in the context of the Middle East. But for those of us who work on the ancient world, we know that awkward silences and vicious reactions come with speaking or writing about these simple facts. The ideological scaffolding provided by archaeology is perhaps nowhere more evident than in Palestine, but not, of course, limited to it. But even if it's a point that we no longer have to make amongst ourselves, certainly in this room, more broadly, archaeology is conceived of as a science of the past. And so that claims it makes about origins are so easily taken as evidence suited to substantiating those political claims. So Chella asked me today to talk to some about the basics of weaponizing archaeology. The use of archaeology as a weapon is actually very basic. It's very fundamental to what archaeology does in many ways. So I tried to boil it down to a few ideas that it might be useful for us to think about. And hopefully my slides will move. There we go. So first of all, archaeology is used to claim territory for itself, for specific people, from other people. We see this in large and small ways. One of the instances I discussed with my students is the clearance of the homes of the people who had lived for generations at Palmyra inside the walls of what archaeologists call the Temple of Bel. That dispossession is well attested, as are similar clearances in the name of archaeology. We can go to Athens, we can go to many other places. Sometimes it's not just about particular sites, it's about whole landscapes. Claims for some always inherently exclude others. In archaeology, we tend to call the spaces around the sites where settlement and cultivation is disallowed archaeological exclusion zones. We call them protected areas, but protected, what are we protecting and for whom are we protecting it? Archaeology is also used to justify things. So not just the taking and occupation of territory, but also a range of forms of power. It is, for instance, used to justify the right to rule. In the Middle East, aerial archaeological surveys for the purpose of locating the Roman frontiers in Syria and Lebanon was designed to demonstrate European control of the region as something that was predestined, as something that was justified by the past. And that was a Roman past that was necessary to create a French mandatory present, as well as to create a landscape in need of foreign investigation. That the many monuments that Baird and others photographed were not actually Roman made very little difference to that argument. Later in Syria, archaeology is one of the tools used to legitimate the power of dictators. For instance, we see this in representations of the Palmyrene Queen Zenobia adorning the Syrian 500-pound note until recently, along with depictions of ancient monuments from Palmyra. So there were first the Tabqa Dam on the Euphrates. So this modern monument up against ancient ones, positioning contemporary Syrian state as a kind of similar world building power to the Roman one. But one of the things I want to bring up is that even before we get to the ways in which archaeology provides that ideological scaffolding, is the way that archaeology itself can be a form of violence against people. It is an extractive industry, what we do. And what we know about the ancient world has not come kind of unbidden from the ground. It has come at a cost. It has been a cost to certain people. It has been at the cost of much exploitative labor. It has also been at the cost of many lives. It has come through military directly or indirectly, and our tools still are those of the military and mining. And they are tools that are violent towards people and landscape and ecologies. So to be able to start to think about delegitimizing the archaeological practices that scaffold injustice, we have to first be able to see them. And my experience is that while the evidence is on our side, that doesn't mean that people will accept the evidence or its impact on contemporary realities. But in an imperfect world, trying matters. Throwing a handful of sand into the gears, if it's all we manage, is worth doing. So that's all I wanted to say tonight, and I will try to start the sharing now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen, for putting so clearly what it is that we're trying to fight against here. I think that is also part of the struggle, and I'm sure that everybody relates to this idea of the kind of known unknowns, right? We all know that archaeology is violent, that it relies on the dispossession of people, that it uses the military tools, that it's about legitimizing state narratives and particularly ethnocentric narratives. I think part of the question for us as the Society of the Study of the Past is, how do we raise those kinds of known unknowns to a position of known knowns that actually can't be ignored, have to be dealt with on a daily basis? I think that is part of the question, and that's really a question of knowledge, but also of power and its relationship with knowledge. So thank you so much for putting that so clearly.